I had always dreamed of camping alone, deep in the heart of the forest, where the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the songs of birds. So one Friday afternoon, I packed my gear, tossed it into my car, and drove to the edge of the dark forest, a place known for its thick trees and peaceful quiet. The excitement built up inside me as I hiked through the woods. The forest was dense, the path winding under the towering trees. Sunlight barely reached the ground, creating a cool, shadowy atmosphere. After about an hour of walking, I found a small clearing, a perfect spot to set up camp. The trees around me stood tall and firm, their branches swaying gently in the soft breeze. The chirping of birds and the occasional flutter of wings made me smile. This was exactly what I needed, pure solitude. I pitched my tent, gathered some firewood, and started a small campfire as the sun began to set. The warm light from the flames flickered across the clearing, and I felt at peace. The day had been long, but now, with the stars twinkling above me, I finally felt like I was part of nature. As the night grew darker, the forest grew quieter. The gentle crackling of the fire was the only sound in the stillness, apart from the occasional hoot of an owl. I lay on my back, wrapped in my sleeping bag, staring up at the star-filled sky. The feeling of being alone in such a vast forest was both calming and a bit unsettling. Then I heard it, a rustle in the bushes nearby. My heart jumped, but I reminded myself that it was probably just a deer or a raccoon. After all, animals were part of the forest too. I tried to relax, but the rustling didn't stop. It got louder, closer. I sat up, gripping my flashlight. I peered into the darkness beyond the warm circle of light from the fire. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. No answer. The forest remained silent, except for the faint sound of leaves moving. I pointed my flashlight at the bushes, the beam cutting through the dark. But there was nothing, just branches swaying in the breeze. I breathed a sigh of relief, telling myself it had to be an animal. Still, the uneasy feeling crept over me, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I added more wood to the fire, hoping its bright flames would keep any curious animals away. Hours passed, and despite the quiet, I couldn't shake the sense that something or someone was watching me. Every small sound, a twig snapping or a leaf falling, made my heart race. Just as I was about to crawl back into my tent, I heard it again, footsteps. But these weren't like the soft, quick sounds of an animal. They were slow, deliberate crunching over the dry leaves. My stomach tightened, fear gripping me. I stood up, grabbing a large stick from the ground. "Who's there?" I shouted, louder this time, my voice echoing through the silent forest. Again, there was no reply. Then, just at the edge of the firelight, I saw him. A tall figure, standing still among the trees. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes on me watching. "What do you want?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt, but my voice wavered. He didn't answer. He just stood there, motionless, staring at me. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing. Who was he? What was he doing out here? Without warning, the man started to move, his steps quick and determined. Panic surged through me. I backed away, stumbling towards my tent. Instinct took over, and before I knew it, I turned and ran into the forest, the stick falling from my hand. Branches whipped against my arms and face as I dashed through the trees, barely able to see where I was going in the dark. I could hear his footsteps behind me, growing louder and closer. My breath came in short, sharp bursts, my legs burning from the effort, but I didn't dare stop. Then I tripped, a root snagging my foot, and I fell hard to the ground. Pain shot through my ankle, but I scrambled to my feet, limping as fast as I could. The forest seemed endless, but in the distance I saw a faint glow, like a light shining through the trees. Desperate, I headed towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, I stumbled into a clearing and saw a small cabin, lights glowing warmly inside. Relief washed over me as I limped to the door and banged on it frantically. "Help! Please, help me!" I cried, tears streaming down my face. The door creaked open and an old man appeared. His face was wrinkled with concern, his eyes wide. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. "There's someone chasing me," I gasped, glancing over my shoulder. "Please, let me in." Without hesitation, the man stepped aside and I rushed inside, collapsing onto the floor. He shut and locked the door quickly, peeking out the window before turning back to me. "There's no one out there," he said calmly. "Are you sure you saw someone?" I nodded, my whole body shaking. He was there, he was following me. The old man sighed and handed me a blanket. "You can stay here tonight. We'll figure this out in the morning." Grateful, I wrapped myself in the blanket, trying to calm down. The warmth of the cabin and the man's presence made me feel safer. But the fear still lingered. Despite my exhaustion, sleep came in fits, my mind replaying the events of the night over and over. When morning finally came, the old man and I walked back to my campsite. But there was no sign of the stranger. No tracks, no disturbed bushes, nothing to prove he had been there. The forest seemed peaceful again, as if the terror of the night had been a dream. But it wasn't. I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. The fear of that night stayed with me, and I packed up my things, determined never to camp alone again. What I had once craved, solitude in the woods, had turned into a nightmare I would never forget. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind where the rain lashes against windows and the wind howls around every corner. I was working the night shift at the Moonlight Inn, a small hotel that had seen better days. Its once bright red carpets were now worn and faded, and the wallpaper was peeling in many places. Only a few guests were staying that night, most of them already asleep in their rooms. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching on forever as the rain continued to pour outside. The old building creaked in the wind, and every now and then, a roll of thunder would echo through the empty hallways. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was too quiet, too still. Then, the front door creaked open. I looked up and saw a man standing in the doorway. He was soaked to the bone, rainwater dripping from his long dark coat and wide-brimmed hat. His face was hidden in the shadows, but I could see his eyes, piercing, staring straight at me. "Good evening," I said, trying to sound calm. "How can I help you?" The man stepped forward, leaving a trail of water behind him. He reached into his coat and pulled out a wallet, placing it on the counter. "I need a room," he said, his voice low and raspy. Something about the way he spoke sent a shiver down my spine. "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. "Do you have a reservation?" "No," he said curtly. "But I need a room. Now." There was something unsettling about him. His clothes looked expensive but old-fashioned, like he had stepped out of another time. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen his face somewhere before, but I couldn't quite place it. "I'll need to see some ID," I said, trying to stick to hotel policy. The man hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly handed me his driver's license. His name was Jack Harrison. I glanced at it quickly and handed it back to him. His hands were shaking slightly as he took it. "Room 13 is available," I said, handing him a key. "Enjoy your stay." Jack took the key without a word and walked down the dimly lit hallway. I watched him go, a heavy sense of dread settling in my chest. Something wasn't right about him. As the night dragged on, the rain continued to pour, and the wind howled louder. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept wandering back to Jack. There was something off about him, something I couldn't quite shake. I decided to do a quick search online, just to ease my mind. What I found made my blood run cold. There was a news article from a few years ago about a man named Jack Harrison. He had been wanted for a series of violent crimes, robberies, assaults, and had disappeared without a trace. The police had been searching for him ever since. My hands shook as I picked up the phone and dialed 911. I explained the situation to the operator, my voice barely above a whisper. The police said they would send someone over right away. When the officers arrived, I led them to room 13. One of them knocked on the door, but there was no answer. They knocked again, louder this time. Still, nothing. The officer turned to me, and I handed him the master key. He unlocked the door and slowly pushed it open. The room was empty. The bed was perfectly made, the window was wide open, and rain was blowing in. There were no bags, no clothes, nothing to show that anyone had been staying there. It was as if Jack Harrison had vanished into thin air. The officers searched the room and the hotel, but there was no sign of him. He had disappeared, just like the article had said. To this day, I still don't know what happened to Jack Harrison. All I know is that he checked into the Moonlight Inn on a stormy night, and then he vanished, leaving behind only a mystery that haunts me to this very day. It was a cool autumn evening, the kind where the air feels crisp and the leaves crunch under your feet. My friends and I had decided to explore the old abandoned factory on the edge of town. The factory had been shut down for years, and we had all heard the rumors, stories of strange creatures and spooky sightings. But we were too curious to stay away. The factory loomed in front of us, its once proud walls now crumbling and covered in graffiti. The windows were broken, and the rusted metal doors hung crooked on their hinges. The building seemed to be leaning, like it was tired and ready to collapse. We squeezed through a gap in the chain-link fence and stepped inside. The air was heavy with dust, and the sound of our footsteps echoed through the empty rooms. Our flashlights cast long shadows on the walls, making everything look eerie and distorted. "Let's check out the elevator shaft," Tristan suggested, always the most daring of the group. We made our way through the maze of rooms and hallways until we found the old elevator shaft. The doors were slightly ajar, revealing a dark hole that dropped down into the depths of the factory. "I think I see something down there," Tristan whispered, peering into the darkness. We all leaned in, but whatever it was had vanished before we could get a good look. Bobby laughed nervously, saying it was just our imaginations. But the uneasy feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. We continued exploring, each room looking more decayed than the last. Old machinery sat rusting in corners, their purpose long forgotten. As we moved deeper into the factory, the air grew colder, and the sense of unease grew stronger. In one of the rooms, we found something strange, a makeshift camp. There were old, dirty blankets spread out on the floor, empty cans of food, and a small fire pit with ashes still inside. "Someone's been living here," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. We all looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Then Bobby pointed down the hallway. "What's that?" he asked, his voice shaky. We all turned to look and saw a shadowy figure dart across the hallway ahead of us. It moved so quickly that it was almost a blur. "Did you see that?" Bobby asked, his face pale. Before we could answer, Sarah screamed. At the end of the hall, there stood a figure, tall, thin, and terrifying. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, and its long, bony fingers curled and uncurled as it watched us. "Run!" Tristan yelled. and we didn't need to be told twice. We bolted down the hallway, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we ran. The figure chased after us, its glowing eyes following our every move. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted toward the exit. The sound of footsteps behind us grew louder, closer. Finally, we burst through the factory doors and into the night. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of the streetlights. Panting and terrified, none of us spoke for a while. To this day, none of us can explain what we saw. But every now and then, when the nights grow long and the shadows creep closer, I think of those glowing eyes and wonder if that figure is still lurking in the factory, waiting for its next visitors.